welcome back to Megan Haskell's Book Club. How y'all doing today? We are in the process of reading Aether Bound, The Rise of Lilith, Book 1, and today I'll be reading Chapter 5. So if you've missed the previous 4 chapters, make sure you go back and listen to those first. And make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel so that you never miss a chapter. Okay, let me get to the spot. Here we go. Tuesday night, Slowville. Not that it was a surprise, but Tuesdays were honestly the worst. We had a few regulars, but even though it was summer, the tourists wouldn't come in force until Thursday. And without a live band playing, there wasn't much draw for the locals. Which was why it was just me and Ty behind the bar, with Gabby working the tables. She was part-time while she went to nursing school. To look at her, you wouldn't necessarily expect that. She kept her hair short and edgy, with colored highlights scattered throughout. This month, they were purple and blue. With heavy eyeliner and a stud in her nose, she seemed more likely to be on a hip-hop stage than giving people sponge baths, but she was serious about helping people recover from trauma. With a frown, Gabby leaned across the bar, drawing both me and Ty toward her. "The guy in the corner is giving me the creeps," she whispered. If no nonsense Gabby was saying that, it was serious. "What did he do?" Ty asked while giving the guy a glaring appraisal. The man was rather nondescript, sitting by himself at a shadowy table out of the way of all the other customers, near the wood-carved bust of a wrathful Poseidon that leered down from the wall above. He was probably in his mid-40s, if I had to guess. That was usually pretty close. The loose button-up tee fit the beach scene, and his hair was tidily combed to one side. A little out of date, but not noteworthy. He wasn't like the bums that occasionally wandered in looking for a freebie or to make trouble. "Nothing," Gabby replied, "except he ordered a glass of wine. Do we even stock wine?" I turned to search through the bottles. We were a beach bar, not a restaurant. If it didn't require a shake or a stir, it wasn't on the menu. Not really. I guess sherry might be close enough. But that doesn't explain why he creeps you out. I poured the sherry into the closest thing I had to a wine glass, a Marie Antoinette coupe. I figured, give the guy a legendary glass supposedly molded into shape by the infamous French queen's perfect breast, and he might not complain. "It's that smile. He reminds me of a wax figure at Madame Tussauds in Hollywood. Have you ever been there? It's creepy. They all look like people, but not quite. He's like that." "Uncanny Valley," Ty chimed in. "I hate that." Right? It's like he's not even a real person. Gabby pulled her water bottle from behind the counter and took a swig. Honestly, I'd try to take his pulse if he hadn't already spoken to me. As I watched, something seemed to move beneath the man's skin, like a hand inside a puppet. Immediately, my mind flashed back to the biker dude on the beach. My hand drifted to my pocket. For whatever reason, I'd kept that napkin doodle. When I'd seen it on my dresser this afternoon, I'd carefully folded it and shoved it in my black work pants. Maybe it was a good luck charm. Or something. Gabby's insight might not be too far off. Now that I knew what I was looking at, I could see the shadows crawling over and around the man's body. Tentacles curled and uncurled around his arms, originating from someplace on his back. When he caught me looking, his smile widened, revealing a flash of pointed shark's teeth within a maw wider than a human should possess before resettling into his human skin. If the guy had been human, he wasn't anymore. I'd never before come across anyone so thoroughly possessed. Even Mom had still retained her core being at the end. The biker guy might have been a close second, but I hadn't been close enough to really see his influences. The cherry on top is that he's been asking about Lil. Me? Not by name, but he asked about any female bartenders, and, well, you're the only one. What did Mr. Button-Up want with me? You didn't tell him anything, did you? Of course not, she paused. Maybe your name, before I realized how much of a creepster he is. But that's it. Should we get Carlos in here? Ty asked. Do you think he's a stalker? Nah, it'll be fine, I replied. The guy wasn't a problem yet, and even though we had a reserve the right to refuse service rule, I hated to make a big deal out of nothing. If he tried something, I'd call in the muscle, but until then, I was happy just to stay behind the counter. A woman at the far end of the bar called for Ty's attention, and we all went back to our duties. I kept an eye on the guy in the corner, but he didn't do much of anything but sit there, staring at his glass with that awkward, bemused smile. The shadowy tentacles were disconcerting at first, but even that eventually slipped to the back of my mind as work took over. Ezra came in at about 10 with his latest fling. There was something about a hunky dude in a wheelchair that got him all sorts of attention, of which he never hesitated to take advantage. Tonight's woman was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed sportswear model type. Thin, but not waifish, she wore a tight tank with a short, flouncy skirt that showed off toned arms and legs. Perfect for the health nut. Gabby, who was picking up a Mai Tai for another table, cocked an eyebrow. Bet you $10 she orders a skinny margarita. I'll take that bet, I replied. It'll be a Paloma. No suggestions. Gabby popped the gum she habitually chewed while at work. I placed a palm across my heart in mock offense. Have I ever? Gabby grinned as she turned and winked at Ezra, passing him on her way to the table. Hey, sis, Ezra called as he wheeled himself up to the lower cutout section of the bar designed for accessibility. Meet Tempest. Tempest, meet my sister Lil. I lifted an eyebrow. Odd name for a Southern California girl. Summer, sure. Lily, pretty common. Sierra, not unheard of. But what kind of parent named their daughter after a storm? Hi, Tempest. Interesting name. I have interesting parents. She smiled and held out her hand, clearly not taking my inquisition personally. That was good. I had a tendency to be a little too blunt with people. I blamed it on 3 years in a social hellhole, but it was probably just me. Nice to meet you. I returned her smile and shook her hand after wiping it on a clean towel first. Never good to greet someone with sticky hands. What are you doing with this ne'er-do-well? I nodded toward my dark-haired playboy brother, who watched us with a shit-eating grin. Tempest smiled. Having a pretty good time, actually. Your brother keeps a girl on her toes. Tell me about it. I faked a grimace. He forces me to exercise, of all things. The nerve. Her grin widened, revealing perfect teeth. So, what can I get you to tonight? I asked as I wiped down the low counter before Ezra put his elbows in sticky drink residue. He could never sit still in his chair and preferred to lean on tables or counters whenever possible. He said it made him feel like less of an invalid. I always told him there was nothing invalid about him, but then my disability was in my head, not visible on my body. Can you do that cucumber thing you made me last time? Ezra asked. Ooh, that sounds good. What's in it? Tempest's wide-eyed excitement was endearing. Oh, a little of this, a little of that, and a few cucumber slices, I replied. It's like a spa water, but alcoholic, Ezra added. Sugar? Just a dash of agave. Sounds delish. I'll have what he's having. Damn, lost the bet. Gabby came up beside Ezra and gave him a sideways hug. Good to see you. Oh? Tempest asked, nonplussed by Gabby's affectionate greeting. Gabby and Ezra had become friends, but I knew there was nothing going on between them. She was a little too studious for Ezra's taste, and he was too healthy for hers. I'd seen her eat more candy than anyone over the age of 12. I figured you for a skinny margarita kind of girl. And I had you with Paloma, so we both lost, I added as I mixed the drinks. Tempest laughed, not taking the bet personally, and gaining a few points in my estimation. She didn't seem like Ezra's usual airhead wannabe fitness instructor type. Tequila's for a taco bar. Without Ezra's suggestion, I probably would have ordered a Mai Tai, so you still would have both been wrong. Full sugar? One's not going to kill me, maybe even two. I was more worried he'd put stevia in this thing. She lifted the glass I handed her in an air clink. I can't stand that stuff. She took a sip, and I watched her expression relax into satisfied appreciation. But this is amazing. Summer garden party in a glass. Another 15 points to Tempest. Glad you like it. Ezra clinked glasses for reals and took his own sip. I left them to it, moving away to mix up a few more drinks while they laughed and chatted. A while later, I felt a change in the atmosphere. It was like the barometer had dropped, but the moon shone bright through the open windows, not a cloud covering its face. I scanned the room. A gray mist like ashy smoke drifted around the creepster's feet. The smoke spread out, slowly forming into a wriggling mass of serpentine figures. The cloud continued to grow and change, getting larger and more defined with each passing second. The snake's jaws gaped, revealing a row of needle-thin teeth. The bodies grew taller and narrower, and I realized my first guess had been wrong. They weren't snakes. They were eels. Gabby, all unknowing, walked toward the cloud. I was stuck behind the bar. I almost yelled at her to stop, but I couldn't do that without seeming like a total nutcase. No one but Ezra knew of my issues, and I didn't want to reveal them now, here, like this. No matter that Mr. Button-Up was suddenly far more dangerous than expected. One of the eels lunged toward Gabby's free hand. I gasped as it bit her, sucking her fingers into its mouth up to her knuckles. She didn't seem to feel it, didn't even break stride. She passed Mr. Button-Up on her way to another table, but the shadow eel went with her, detaching from the rest of the demon cloud. Mr. Button-Up smiled, but didn't look up. He still hadn't taken a sip of his drink, though he'd been sitting there over an hour. To be fair, I wasn't sure sherry was exactly what he wanted, but he could have changed his order. I watched, horrified, as the eel demon began working its way up Gabby's arm, little by little, swallowing her whole. She didn't react. Nothing seemed to be happening. Her hand and arm moved as if nothing was there. Yet the eel climbed higher and higher until its mouth was at her shoulder. Could this all be in my head? Was I finally going crazy? Mr. Button-Up chuckled, eyes trained on his glass. There was no one around him. What could he possibly find funny? The rest of the shadow eels slithered around the man's feet. They didn't make a move on any of the other customers, but then none of them were nearby. When Gabby came back to the counter, I leaned toward her and listened for the influence of the eel demon. It was entirely silent. Odd. Most demons I'd come in contact with were constantly whispering their desires into the host's ear. Most sought immediate influence. The eel just hung there, its incorporeal teeth latched onto Gabby's arm. Are you feeling all right? Maybe its influence was deeper than I could see. Maybe it was doing something inside her mind instead of speaking with words. As much as I'd been seeing the creatures since I was 12, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time studying them. I didn't need to add to the crazy. I feel great. Why? Gabby's smile was genuine, though her eyes looked a little glassy. Maybe I was reading too much into things. I just wanted to make sure that guy wasn't bothering you. He didn't seem interested in me. She glanced over at his table. He wanted you. I shuddered. Something about the way she said that felt wrong. I would have sworn her gaze turned more intense, her eyes going bloodshot around the edges. But was it real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't be sure. With a flick of my fingers, I tried to dislodge the eel on her arm. It didn't budge. There had only been a few cases where I'd really tried to get rid of the demons hanging around people. Mostly, they were harmless, encouraging desires that people already had. Appease them and they calmed, but to get rid of them completely took more effort. I'd done it once before for Ezra when he'd finally accepted that he couldn't recover from the fall. He would always be bound in a wheelchair. For a guy who'd been a star athlete even as a high school sophomore, that had been a debilitating blow. A demon had latched onto him then, a depressive demon, one that had wanted him to wallow in self-loathing. I couldn't let that stand. I had researched everything I could on exorcisms and spiritual influences. Most of it had been utter nonsense, but at last I'd been able to cast it away with a saltwater spray. It had seemed silly at the time, but the demon had left and taken Ezra's depression with it. I pinched a bit of salt from the margarita bowl and tossed it toward Gabby's shoulder. What the hell? What was that for? She demanded. At least she still sounded like herself. Rather than letting go, the wisp of cloud that made up the eel's body narrowed around her arm, as if grasping her even tighter. Nothing. Sorry, I mumbled. I shouldn't have bothered trying to fix anything. It wasn't as if I had any real ability to affect the demons, only appease them. Gabby's gaze traveled back to the man at the table, as if drawn there by a magnet or magic. Maybe you should go talk to him. He seems important, she whispered. My eyes narrowed at the sudden change in opinion. How so? Gabby shrugged. You should go talk to him. The demon was definitely influencing her, but it didn't seem to be hurting her. So maybe she was right. Maybe if I just went and talked to Mr. Button-Up, I would be able to figure out what he wanted and get him to leave. Appease the master, and the slave might go away. That's it for chapter 5. Make sure you like, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing that I always forget how to do. And I'll see you next week with chapter 6.